alien girl was buried on a forbidden moon and the human who loved her built a temple there. They called it sacred quarantine. A necessary exile from the living galaxy. A sterile and secret solution to a problem no diplomat could solve. But to Elias Rain, it was nothing more than a betrayal and starlight and erasure of the only being he had ever truly loved. No political wording, no bureaucratic stamp, no treaty clause could make him believe that what they did to her was anything less than murder disguised as necessity. They said she was too dangerous, too symbolic, too politically volatile to be buried on her homeworld, where shrines might grow around her memory and martyrs might echo her name. And so the alien girl princess, exile, warrior, peace weaver was taken in silence, no ceremony, no hymns, just a cold signature on a sealed dispatch from the Galactic Council. Her body was placed aboard an unmarked vessel and ferried through uncharted routes to a place that did not appear on any star map, a place chosen not for reverence but for isolation. LX-7, a jagged, wind-scoured moon orbiting the gas giant Orthus, deep in the Skellum Reach, a place declared forbidden by both Human Coalition and Erythian Imperium for different reasons. A cursed place, they whispered. Lifeless, red, and sterile. A graveyard of ancient battles. A dumping ground for things the galaxy didn't want to remember. No microbes lived there. No storms brewed except from static. No light touched its surface without bleeding red. It was perfect for those who wanted her to vanish. But Elias had been there when she died, not physically. No, they'd banned him from the chamber, claiming conflict of interest. But he'd felt it in his bones, as if a star had flickered out in the back of his skull. He was once her peacekeeper, assigned to protect the last diplomatic envoy between humans and Erethians during the ceasefire talks. What began as duty turned into understanding. Understanding turned into friendship. And friendship into a bond that blurred every rule and protocol. They laughed over tea brewed from Erethian blossoms and studied the ancient dialects of extinct species together. He memorized the way her eyes glowed brighter when she read poetry. She traced scars on his hand and asked about his childhood. Their connection grew like ivy in secret halls until one day it bloomed too brightly. When war threats reignited, someone needed to be blamed. Her enemies saw an opportunity. The council caved. They called her a security risk, said her presence incited unrest, that her memory could reignite war. She was taken without trial, executed under the guise of containment. They buried her story in footnotes, deleted her public identity. Her death was listed as diplomatic failure. But Elias he never let go. He pulled the coordinates from old navigation logs, pieced together encrypted flight patterns, paid favors to smugglers and ex-Navy techs who owed him from long ago. Missions. After 3 sleepless days hopping from relay to relay, he reached LX-7 in a rusted scout vessel, unregistered and quietly falling apart. He watched from low orbit as the burial vessel landed. No markings, no anthem. Just a cube of gray metal descending toward cracked red stone. He saw them unload the containment pod, her body wrapped not in ceremonial silk or a stasis crystal, but in industrial polymer, cold, unnamed, as if she were biological waste. They dropped her into a trench dug by remote drones. Not even a footnote of reverence, no spoken words, no ritual. The trench was shallow, barely 10 meters. The sort used to bury failed mining equipment, then they sealed it. Red dust over blue. Skin silicon over memory, and just like that she was gone. Elias gripped the ship's controls until his knuckles whitened. Every instinct in his body screamed to land, to scream at them, to tear her free. But he couldn't. One transmission from them would have flagged his ship, drawn the coalition. He would have been destroyed before he even reached the surface. So he waited 12 hours in orbit, eyes unblinking. And when the burial vessel lifted off and LX-7 fell silent again, he descended. He didn't care if there were residual sensors. Didn't care if the system was flagged. He needed to touch the ground where she lay. Needed to tell her she was not forgotten. He stepped out into a malfunctioning exosuit barely rated for such a toxic atmosphere, and walked the last few steps with his helmet flickering static in his ears. The wind was silent, the air thin and bitter. The ground cracked beneath his boots like old bone. He reached the trench, fell to his knees, and began to dig, slowly, with gloved hands, peeling back the red crust that now entombed her. Not to unbury her. No, just to see something, anything, a sign that she was there, that this was real, that it hadn't been a dream. As his oxygen levels dropped, he took a small vial from his suit pouch. It held sacred valley sand from her homeworld, the last relic she'd given him. He poured it into the soil where they'd laid her, letting the golden grains vanish into the dust. Then he carved a mark into the stone beside the trench, not in standard tongue, but in the calligraphy of her people, the Erathian heart script she had taught him by candlelight. A simple phrase, "Remember me." His breath fogged his visor. His hands trembled. The alarms on his suit began to scream. But he didn't leave until he finished the carving. Only then did he stagger back to the ship, lungs burning, vision spinning. As he lifted off, the trench grew smaller in his rear screen, just a crack in a dead world. But to him it was the center of everything, her resting place, her silence, her absence. And as the stars bled into view and the system receded, Elias made himself a promise. Not in anger, not in rebellion, but in love. He would return, not once, not twice, but every year. He would bring pieces of her world back to her. Petals of forbidden flowers, songs encoded into stone. And one day, when he could afford the tools, he would begin to build. Not a monument of grief, but of memory, something sacred, something impossible to ignore, something that would make the galaxy remember her name, even if it cost him everything. Because if no one else would come to the alien girl's grave, then he would make it so they couldn't look away. And even in death, she would not be alone. The first year he returned, there was nothing but wind and red silence, the same ragged trench barely visible beneath layers of dust, the same dry horizon carved by storms that seemed to forget where they were blowing. And yet, Elias Rain stood at the grave again longer, this time his exosuit upgraded now, allowing him hours rather than minutes on the surface of LX-7, and in those hours he simply sat beside the trench and spoke to her, told her what had happened in the galaxy since she died, what had been said, and more importantly, what had been erased. He told her how the Erathian shrines across Zora the Prime had been quietly shut down, how her name had been struck from official record, how even the diplomats who once shook her hand now referred to her as the anomaly when they thought no one was listening. And he described his own descent into irrelevance, his removal from the peacekeeping corps, his name smeared in backchannel whispers, his income dried up and his allies distant, but he told it all without bitterness because those things didn't matter, not here, not beside her, not where the stars burned low and the soil still held her shape. And when he left, he planted the first stone, a flat obsidian slab etched with another line in Erathian heart script. She gave more than they knew, and though it felt small, it was the beginning. The second year he brought a carving tool, and under the scorching light of twin eclipses, he began to chip into the basalt cliffs that overlooked the grave, tracing the contours of symbols she once drew on paper when she spoke of ancient Erethian temples lost to time, structures that harmonized with magnetic fields and resonated beneath suns, places of meditation and memory now destroyed by war. And he worked slowly, alone, every year returning with a new tool, a new supply of stone, a new section of the alien vision she'd once whispered in secret, building not from plans but from memory, hers, not his, as if each rock he placed and shaped was an act of resurrection, a quiet rebellion against the forgetting. By year 5, the trench had become sacred ground, a low altar now framed by black spires curved inward like fingers reaching toward a sky that had never deserved her. And the wind howled less in that place now, almost respectfully, as though something beneath the surface had changed, or was beginning to notice him. He started to call the structure a temple, not aloud, not officially, but in his thoughts, because it no longer felt like a monument to death. It was becoming something alive, not in flesh, but in presence, as if the moon itself were listening, responding to the devotion of the only man who remembered the girl it buried. And though the rest of the galaxy continued to move on new wars, New alliances, new betrayals. Elias's life narrowed into a rhythm of solitude, a year of wandering among quiet stars and forgotten ports, followed by a pilgrimage back to LX-7, where the structure grew taller and wider. Rooms carved into the rock, a domed chamber open to the sky with her symbol etched into the floor, and around the perimeter small alcoves that held relics objects she once touched, gifts he risked his life to steal from museums and archives that dared claim ownership over her memory, all placed now where only the wind and stars could see them. By the 7th year, stories began to circulate among traders and fringe colonists, a temple on a dead moon glowing in the dark, built by a madman or a prophet depending on who told it, and Elias, still careful, still cloaked in the systems beyond regulated space, knew it was only a matter of time before attention returned, but he could not stop, not now, not after what happened in year 8, when he brought the crystal. It was a fragment of an Erathian stasis core, illegally salvaged from a crashed cruiser, barely functional, but reactive to organic memory patterns. He had no certainty it would respond. But he embedded it above her resting place, aligning its facets with the magnetic lines he'd mapped into the floor. And when he powered it on, the crystal pulsed once, dimly, then again, brighter, and then it remained light, a soft, blue glow that made his breath catch in his throat. And though he didn't understand how, he felt it. She was still there, not alive, not fully, but aware. From that year onward, the temple changed on its own. Dust stopped collecting near the altar, and strange blue moss began to grow in cracks that had been barren for centuries. The wind shifted its path to circle the structure instead of battering it, and the air, long unbreathable, began to stabilize, slightly registering trace oxygen levels where there should have been none, and Elias, now gaunt and aged, his hair gray at the temples, documented it all with care, but told no one this was hers, not theirs. He expanded the structure slowly, respectfully, with curves drawn from her sketches, music encoded in walls that played only when sunlight hit the quartz veins just right. And at the center he constructed a sanctuary, a glass sarcophagus of Erathian design, using the remaining shards of recovered crystal and the tools he'd borrowed from alien tech priests who never knew where their parts were going. And within that structure, under protective shielding and gravitational anchoring, he placed her remains reinterred after years of careful digging and cleansing, with hands that never shook, never faltered, because for this he could not fail. And when she lay once more within light and symmetry and song, something changed permanently. The moon's sensors, long silent, came online, as if awakened, and for the first time in recorded history, the planetary core emitted a hum, low and rhythmic, like breath from a giant sleeping in the deep crust. And Elias heard it and wept, not because he was afraid, but because it felt like recognition. Year after year, he returned, adding layers to the temple, not for grandeur, but memory chambers filled with her poetry, recreated in holographic shimmer, and one room that played only the sound of her laughter, filtered from a recording he'd saved from their last shared dinner when she teased him for not knowing how to fold an Erathian blossom napkin. And as word of the temple spread in hushed tones, smugglers became pilgrims, scientists became seekers, and though no ship dared land, many watched from orbit, wondering how it had grown, why the moon no longer matched its old charts, and why the temple never cast a shadow. The Galactic Council took notice by year 11, issuing a silent investigation, but no team that landed returned. Sensors failed, instruments jammed, and one drone uploaded only a single frame, a human kneeling beside a glowing sarcophagus, hand outstretched as if in prayer, before the feed went dark. The moon was then blacklisted, LX-7 now officially designated a reactive anomaly, and all access restricted, but Elias kept returning, bypassing lockouts, cloaking his signals, slipping through the net of authorities who no longer understood. The thing he had built, this was no longer just a memorial. It was a promise fulfilled, a sanctuary pulled from myth and placed into stone, a song made solid in the quiet of exile. And though his body weakened, his vision never did, and each year he brought something new, not just materials, but meaning, a child's drawing of a star, sent from an Erathian orphan who had learned her name from WhisperNet stories. A carved amulet that once belonged to her mother, traded for half his ship's power supply. A vial of water from the spring of Soralen, believed to have healing memory. And with each offering, the temple glowed brighter, grew warmer until its ambient. Readings began to affect orbiting ships' engines slowed. Nav systems drifted, clocks skipped seconds as if time bent near her grave. And through it all, Elias never stopped building, never stopped returning. Never once questioned the madness others saw, because to him this was the only place that made sense, the only truth left in a galaxy that had silenced its best voice. And as he sat once more beside her resting place, tracing a line along the crystal that held her, he whispered, "They forgot you, but I never did. And this temple is the memory they can't erase." The skies above LX7 had always been silent, veiled in crimson haze and static, but on the 12th anniversary of her death, they cracked open with violence. 4 coalition destroyers emerged from slipspace like blades from velvet, their hulls bristling with kinetic batteries and orbital torpedoes, their orders precise and final. The anomaly known as the Temple of LX7 was to be reduced to ash, its architect apprehended or killed, and all remains biological, architectural, or technological purged from existence under Article 9 of the Anti-Deification Protocol, a directive rarely invoked, reserved only for structures deemed dangerously resonant with cultural insurgency. And at the center of this storm stood Elias Rain, now a ghost in the eyes of the galaxy, his skin lined and weathered, hair like frost, spine bent but spirit burning as fiercely as the day he first touched her grave. And though his body bore the price of years in exile, his purpose had never wavered. He had returned one final time, not for a visit, not for another edition, but to complete what he had started, the last piece of the temple, a beacon tower, 70 feet tall, crowned with a prism designed to catch the planet's twin eclipses and refract her final message across the stars. A pulse of memory encoded in light, a declaration of who she was and what she stood for, a transmission powerful enough to reach every known system in the human Erathian corridor and beyond. And as the destroyers formed their attack alignment, he climbed the spire with trembling limbs, tools strapped to his back, a weathered data capsule clutched in his hand containing her voice, her image, and the forbidden truth they had erased, that she had died for peace, not war, that she had offered surrender when others demanded vengeance, and that her final words were not a threat but a plea for unity. He reached the summit, breath ragged, and activated the beacon's core, inserting the capsule and triggering the alignment sequence, the tower humming to life with a deep, resonant note that echoed through the temple's stone bones like a heartbeat. And below him the sarcophagus glowed more brightly than ever, her form within serene, unchanged by time, yet somehow more luminous, more present, as if she were not simply lying in rest, but waiting. As the coalition command issued its final countdown, Elias descended slowly, his knees buckling with each step, but he reached the sanctuary floor and stood before her one last time, pressing his hand to the crystal as the countdown reached 2 minutes, whispering with cracked lips, "You deserved a world that remembered you." So I built one, and as he turned to face the storm above, missiles began their descent, sleek shadows, falling toward the temple with deadly grace, but just as impact should have shattered the dome, the sky pulsed blue, a wave of light surging from the altar outward in a perfect ring, freezing the missiles midair, their casings vibrating as if uncertain whether time still existed. On board the destroyers, chaos erupted, controls locked, systems rebooted, and pilots screamed as time fractured inside their own minds, each caught in a loop of the same heartbeat, the same sound, her voice, low and calm, speaking through their comes in Erathian and Standard at once, a voice long thought buried now commanding the heavens, saying only, "This is not your place." And then silence returned, not broken silence, but sacred, weighty, eternal, and the missiles dissolved into blue dust, falling like ash onto the red stone. Elias collapsed, not from injury, but from awe, from the overwhelming weight of what he saw next. Her fingers moved within the crystal, slow and graceful, and her eyes, those endless, liquid gold eyes, opened for the first time in 12 years. blinking not with confusion, but with recognition, and when her gaze found his, he wept openly, not as a mourner but as a witness to a miracle, her miracle, born not of vengeance or science or prophecy, but of devotion of the temple he had carved. In silence, year after year, stone by stone, until the moon itself remembered her. She did not rise, not yet, but her hand reached out to the surface of the sarcophagus and met his, palm to palm through crystal, and in that contact, memory surged outward like light through broken glass. The temple walls shimmered with visions of her life, her people, the worlds she saved, the blood she refused to spill, and across the galaxy where the beacon now shone, citizens paused to watch a face long hidden return to the stars. Erethian children who had only known fear saw a queen who once sang to stars. Human captains lowered their flags in silent awe. The coalition council, fractured and uncertain, fell into bitter, disbelieving stillness as the anomaly they had buried became the memory they could no longer erase. And as the light began to dim and the moon settled once more into its quiet orbit, the destroyers fled, not from protocol, but from shame. They could not destroy what now lived in the hearts of billions. Elias, too weak to stand, lay beside her tomb as warmth slowly radiated from the floor, and in his final waking moment, he smiled not because his mission was complete, but because she was no longer alone. When the sun rose over the cliffs of LX7, it lit not a grave but a sanctuary, and though Elias Rain's heart stopped before the eclipse passed, his name would be carved in the temple beside hers in the same Erethian script. Under the phrase she had once etched in his notebook beneath a star chart, "Love is not forgotten," and from that day onward pilgrims came not out of curiosity but reverence, their ships hovering in silent orbit as they gazed down upon the temple that should not have existed, glowing eternally on a forbidden moon, built by one human who refused to forget her and guarded now not by machines or missiles but by memory and by love.